Well, thank you all so much for being here. We're in the final stretch of the day, and this is a very important topic. As Andrea said, my name is Amira, and I work on policy at the Solana Foundation. I'm excited to be joined by this incredible panel. We'll start with Jonathan. Jonathan's the founder of Starling Lab, which prototypes tools and principles to bring historians, legal experts, and journalists into the world of Web3. Over the last few years, they've documented evidence of 14 genocides and mass atrocities and put them on chain. Next to him is Philip. Philip is technical lead of the Rohingya Archive, a digital archive of documents important to the Rohingya people of Burma. This includes passports, identity documents, school certificates, and old photographs. And then finally, we have Sebastian Campos-Groth. He's the COO of Arweave, the decentralized storage network that makes information permanence possible. A few years ago, Sebastian found out that people like Philip were using Arweave to upload things like documents of the Rohingya people, and so they've started playing an increasingly strong role in using blockchain to protect human rights. So we'll start out, we have a lot to get through, and this is really weighty but interesting stuff. And I want to kick it off to Jonathan just to give us a sense of what kinds of content is being archived and what this looks like. So Jonathan, what's an example of a project that has come out of Starling Lab?
Thanks so much for having me here. It's really great to see this ecosystem thriving. You know, when we think about Web3 and storage on Web3, it became obvious to us that when you decentralize storage of human rights archives, there's actually a lot of responsibilities, big responsibilities around the ethics of how you do it and how you can control the information. So, but it didn't scare us off. And we got lucky in that the brave folks over at the USC Shoah Foundation decided to work with us, and we took 55,000 testimonies of genocide survivors. It's about 4 petabytes worth of information. We started to architect a system to put it onto the decentralized web. And it was a very moving project because we realized that at that point, we were finding a way to store information that we felt was actually uniquely appropriate for this type of content. Because as you distribute the information, you now have thousands of nodes that can actually store the information, and each node becomes an active participant in that preservation. And the moonshot for us would be, what if you could have any mobile phone be a node on that type of web? And so now, as an activist or someone that cares about making sure that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past, I might be able to donate, let's say, 100 megabytes on my phone for that type of purpose. So yeah, very happy to discuss all this today.
Very cool.
It's here, it's now, it's mature.
And Philip, you know, we can drill into one particular example. So, you know, tell us a bit about what's going on with the Rohingya people and why documenting, you know, their sort of personal documents is important, and why it's important to do that in decentralized storage.
Yeah, so very happy to give you a little overview about the Rohingya people. In 1982, the Burmese government decided to kind of deny citizenship to the Rohingyas, which made them effectively stateless. And so in 2017, they started a coordinated attack, basically the military attacked the villages, and they needed to flee all over the world. And right now they are living in many refugee camps around the world, for example in Pakistan, Bangladesh, Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia. And so we saw the need to back up their identity cards in collaboration with the Rohingya project. So the main goal here was for us to have an archive which serves as a kind of community archive for the Rohingyas themselves to preserve their legacy and their culture, as well as have an evidence archive for the world to potentially go to court and claim some deeds of the community.
And can I dig into that a little more? Like, what kinds of things are you documenting, and why is it important? Like, why upload a Rohingya person's passport to the blockchain?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. So currently they are dispersed. So they have all this, or they have this all expired documents, which are at risk of getting lost. And by uploading, digitizing them first and then uploading them to the blockchain, to the block weave of Arweave, they're preserved forever, and are basically evidence that the people, they had a legal citizenship of Burma, but they were denied of.
Yeah, so it's really evidence that this person's identity has been erased that you're putting on chain.
Yeah, like the whole basically ethnic group of Rohingya people who lost their identity because they needed to flee their home country and now living in refugee camps all over the world without having access to a legal identity in none of these countries, basically.
And Sebastian, when did you first realize that people like Philip were using Arweave to document sort of these kinds of mass atrocities?
Yeah, so apologies. I think that was always the hope that the technology that Arweave network enables, that this would be one of the use cases, right? To allow censorship-resistant documentation of free speech or any other matter that is really important that perhaps people that are empowered don't want to have recorded in a permanent way. And so that was the hope, and we started seeing it in a couple of different instances, even before I met Philip. And so it had to do a lot more with freedom of speech and recording this. I remember distinctly at the beginning of COVID-19 in China, there was a project called Weiblocked that used a bot to basically, whenever a topic was being censored on Sina Weibo, this microblogging site on China, whenever something got censored, they would just immediately copy everything and store it on Arweave, and that way being able to preserve what was actually going on in mainland China. And that was one of those projects that we were like, oh, that's super clever. That's a really good, easy use case for Arweave. And then we started getting more and more into it, and then we ran into like really good projects like the one that Philip has been working on.
And how do you hear about these projects?
They reach out to us over DMs on Twitter. And, and since then, of course, we've become better, and we have a process. And so you can go to arweave.org, and there's a grants form. You can apply to those grants. But yeah, in the beginning, it was like super organic, which is always very nice when people use the technology that you've built for the purpose that you wanted it to be built. So yeah, that's how it happened.
Yeah, maybe here, huge props to Arweave to being that responsive. So really, they just online on Twitter. Like, I would just reach out to Sam, told him about the project, about the idea, and he was like, wow, that's a great idea. That's one of the reasons he wanted to build out Arweave in the first instance, and we hopped on a call and yeah, took it from there.
Really? You were also a Twitter DM? I didn't realize.
Twitter DM, yes.
Funny. That's funny.
Yeah.
Twitter DM, how human rights preservation happens. I want to talk a little bit about the process and the mechanics of how this stuff works, because it feels tricky to me to figure out how you go from a refugee camp to actually being able to mechanically put something on chain. We've all seen how difficult it is to even access a deck or on-ramp into crypto. And so I'm curious what this looks like. I don't know, Jonathan, if you have an example of how you actually get the evidence on the ground.
So we took some time to develop what we call the Starling framework, and it has 3 steps. It's pretty intuitive. You start with capture, and we authenticate at source the image, the video, the document, and that really comes down to having some form of hash and then a signature that can be put on that hash. And ideally, you could do that with some form of hardware-based encryption, because that's more robust, but you can even do it with a software-based approach and some sort of link back to an identity, let's say like an Ethereum wallet. So that's capture. You're authenticating at capture, and then you're pushing out that information, the hash, on-chain. And we use 9 different L1s that we experiment with, so that now we have a record of the integrity of the original file. The second step is storage, and that's where we put it onto distributed storage, and you have a variety of different orchestration measures that can help ensure that an encrypted, protected version of the file is then spread out. The last part was something that it occurred to us, especially as we were working with lawyers, which is that you've got to bring humans back into the loop. Because just because you preserve something or you register something with cryptography doesn't actually mean that it has veracity, right? I can still fake all sorts of different parts of the contents of that type of documentation. So what we do is in the verification step, we bring humans together and they actually make expert validation and verification of the information to build a knowledge graph around a single image. And that way you now have multiple points of view that can establish the veracity of what's going on inside the content. That too gets registered on chain. So capture, store, and verify. And to give you a sense, I mean, it's a very dynamic process. It can move quickly. Probably one of my favorite examples was we worked with Reuters to protect their coverage of the 2020 election. And each step, as the photographers in the field captured the content, as they stored it, and then when their editors back at HQ needed to verify the information, all of that was on chain. And we created an incredible archive that documented each of the 78 days between the election and the inauguration. And sadly, that's a very contested piece of history at this point. But we have hundreds of photographs that document even days like January 6th. So that it's clear what happened through each of those steps.
And what about in situations where it's a little trickier, where you don't have a bunch of really skilled Reuters photographers to capture this evidence? How are the Rohingya people uploading evidence of their passports or their school certificates to the blockchain?
So yeah, they are not, the Rohingya people themselves, they don't upload themselves. So the researchers which support us from UCLA and Queens College, New York, develop a kind of protocol for us, or like the field officers working in the refugee camps, to follow. So first thing they doing is like, it's identifying participants, potential participants, and then the documents. So they basically go to the camps and they talk to people who are Rohingya, ask them for documents, what kind of documents they have. And it's kind of tricky because there's a lot of mistrust, and they're really afraid about, being prosecuted or getting in troubles in the camps for handing out the documents. And yeah, like the field officers go there and explain them the idea about the project and why to do it, and basically, yeah, start a conversation. And the refugees, like, we got really positive feedback. They were all willing to hand, or like most of them willing to hand out documents and to do video testimonials, explaining kind of the background story of the documents. And then, unfortunately, so for an archival sort of point of view, it would be great to, like, once you get a document, to directly upload it and archive it. But it's very hard in the refugee camps because there's no internet, and it's a lack of security, so that we actually need to bring the documents outside of the refugee camp in order to digitize them and upload them. And this happens by the field officers. And they go through like a extensive metadata standard where they put in all the information about the document, the language, the type of the document, and some other descriptive components. And then it comes basically to the client application we build, which connects to the block weave. And it's a two-step process. First, we have the metadata transaction. It's fully encrypted and describes the data type itself. And the second point is the data transaction, which then goes linked to the metadata transactions both together on the block weave. And the benefits why we're doing this is once the metadata transaction might change. So you might find more evidence describing more background about the document, or adding a translation to the original data file. And you can just update the metadata while still having this chain of uploads. So like once uploaded, it cannot be changed, and you upload a new metadata file in order to update the metadata and append information to the original file, which might be a scan of the ID plus a video, talking about the background.
Sebastian, I'm wondering if you've seen any particularly interesting examples of how people overcome this problem of being able to actually get the information and put it on chain. What's your sort of favorite instance of figuring out this problem?
Yeah, for sure. I really like, there's a couple of OSINT, so open source intelligence applications, that I really like. And the most elegant solutions are the simplest, right? So for example, we have in the current war on Ukraine by Russia, hundreds and hundreds of pieces of information that have been recorded just using community pools, so people contribute to them, and then you have something that starts like recording these snippets. It can be social media, it can be TikTok, which a lot of this coverage is being reported on.
Can you go back just a step? Like, what's a community pool? What's being documented?
Right. So basically, it's a pot where people can decide to contribute some tokens in order to fund the efforts to archive some stuff, right? And this can be like as easy as just like paying for the storage on Arweave, or it can also just be funding someone to actually go to a place and then
And can anyone contribute to those pools? Like people here could contribute to them?
Yeah, you can contribute to those pools. There's one that you can check out in the block explorer for Arweave. It's called viewblock.io, and you can check out one that we have right there, and that's the Ukraine-Russia one. You can check those out, and you can also create your own ones. That'd be very cool to see more of those.
That's really interesting. I want to shift gears a little bit. The way that I actually first learned about this idea of using decentralized storage to keep evidence of people experiencing genocide and displacement or archiving history, was on a trip to Washington with Sam from Arweave, actually, where he started explaining all these things that were happening in Hong Kong and Ukraine and Russia related to uploading information on chains so it couldn't be erased. And we were in the meeting with the State Department, and a woman from the State Department said, well, wait a second. Not everyone wants all their documentation to just be stored online permanently. In Europe, there's actually these right to be forgotten laws where you can proactively take yourself offline. So how do you balance privacy with the need to actually sort of record this evidence? How do you all think about it at Arweave?
Yeah, I think that, Philip and Jonathan, you can also talk about the privacy aspect and encrypting and data aspect of it, right? Because one of the ways that you can do it is, well, just upload something that is encrypted. You have the keys, someone else doesn't have the keys. But by default, everything that you store in Arweave is stored in a publicly accessible way. One of the ways that we basically balance out this need for permanence and for censorship resistant, but also with the real need to comply with local laws and local regulations, including the right to be forgotten, is by having decentralized content policy. So rather than having one specific content policy that applies to everyone, we ourselves have a set of content policies that we can add to. So if we get a DMCA takedown request or something like that, we evaluate it, we can add it to the content policies, and then these get, the miners can decide if they want to run these content policies or not. That's totally up to the members and the participants in the network. That's like the best way in which we can assure that people can remain compliant with their own infrastructure, but we can also make sure that there's no one single way in which everything can be deleted if an authoritarian government wants it, for example.
Jonathan, how do you all think about this?
I mean, this is the most complicated question that we face on Web3, because at the end of the day, with billions of dollars that have been invested by companies that were completely incentivized to kind of try to do right, we've all seen that there's been disastrous results with content moderation. This is, in some ways, it's an intractable issue. I think what Sebastian's talking about is really powerful, which is this notion of how communities are going to ultimately be the ones that have to take control of this process and develop norms and standards. And the power of those communities and how they're governed, that's the table stakes for this next era of the web. I often talk with my colleagues and I say, I think some days I wake up and I wonder if we're going to be nostalgic for this moment that there was like a single person like Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk who could actually moderate, because effectively that's a very, there's a lot of power with that, but it's also very effective if there's truly an issue. In a decentralized fashion, like you're playing a cat and mouse game almost forever to try to get rid of content that potentially is abhorrent. So I think Jay Graber's done a great job on this. I urge everyone to take a look at her work on decentralized content moderation strategies. She's the head of Blue Sky and doing really great things there and thinking about how to decentralize the Twitter protocol. And I think it's innovation in that area is going to be some of the most critical work that can be done. I can say from our lab's point of view, we believe that this is an unfinished matter. It can all go terribly wrong. So if we do not engage and we don't experiment and we don't think about the ways in which communities can work together to stop this problem, it's the notion that decentralization solves everything is just wrong, right? It requires actually more engagement, more innovation than a centralized world.
Yeah, I could imagine an instance where, it's important to take down content, not just because someone wants it to be taken down, but because, evidence of them being, say, involved in a protest could actually be a threat to their life. And I'm curious if you've seen any hard examples of that on Arweave, Sebastian.
Not yet, but when it comes to normal, let's call it like vanilla takedown requests, yeah, and there's a process that is already instituted for that. And I think I recall one instance where we've taken down sort of like personal identifier that someone had uploaded by mistake, and it was a CV, and that was also that was something that we could successfully remove.
And when you say you could take it down, how did that actually work in practice?
Well, I mean, that someone sends the same way that you would send a takedown request, DMCA takedown request, to whatever emails it's available on the website, and then we are able to validate this claim and then just also make sure, because you need to validate the claim. You don't want someone removing something that someone actually wants up, right? So you need to validate the claims every single time. And then once you've done that, then you just proceed to add it to the content moderation policies that we ourselves run and that we can recommend others to run as well. And that basically removes it for all the infrastructure that the companies behind Arweave run.
Got it. So you get a request, you validate the veracity of that request, you adopt it, and then you send out that request to all the other validators and say, hey, here's a content moderation recommendation.
Correct. And they're incentivized to run these content policies, right? Like they don't want to have to figure out if they're being compliant or not on their own. If someone is doing that work for them, that's great, and they're happy to also apply them. At the same time, no one is forcing them to, right? So it really is something that, as Jonathan mentioned, is not 100% finished, but that's the way that we can ensure that everyone that runs or is participant in the Arweave network has that choice. What content moderation policy do they want to run, and how do they want to apply them?
Got it. In the last few minutes, I want to look forward to what's next and how there's evolution in this space. And Jonathan, you and I both first connected, I think, over Saga and the announcement over the Solana mobile stack, and I never expected this use case for SMS. So I would love to hear a little bit about what you all are working on with the phone.
So this is really exciting because it's the first time I'm able to talk about this publicly. We have been engaging with the SDK for the Saga phone, and we are really excited to announce that we're going to be developing a prototype with the phone that will use the phone's signing capabilities, the advanced signing capabilities, and the wallet to actually provide a proof of an authentic photograph directly on the phone itself. And this is exciting because I think you're starting to see the stack really come to life, where it can begin on hardware and then very quickly move up to registration, which would be on Solana, NFTs that can help establish custody and some form of authority around the authenticity. We've got a whole plan that is now going to be put in motion, and with some luck before the end of the year, we plan on deploying this with our teams in Ukraine. So it's applied work that's meant to be in the right place at the right time, but here's why I'm so excited about it. This is an open source project that's dealing with essentially open source hardware, firmware. I can't tell you how important this is because the notion that you could manipulate phones at the firmware level is not an abstract fear. Our researchers found out that actually North Korea, for 8 years, has had a program with the official phones of North Korea. They forked Android, and they use almost the identical notion of authenticity that you guys use for this stack at Saga, but they used it to, one, surveil people by saying, oh, every single photo that's taken on this phone is now linked to the device at the exact time and place which the photo was taken. Essentially condemns people for taking photos that they don't want them to take. And the second thing is that the state also used it as a tool of censorship. So they created an allowed list where those hashes, that only the government maintained this kind of hash list. And so only approved hashes were things that could be on mobile phones that were the official phones of Korea. So that means if I take a photo that was not on that list, the operating system itself would delete the file. How crazy is that, right? So the Saga phone now becomes actually this complete alternative to that authoritarian model of censorship. And we are really excited to think about pioneering a way for making this SDK expansive. We're going to deploy it in the field, and we couldn't be more proud to be announcing that today.
How frickin' cool is that?
Thanks.
Saga is going to be used to document the war in Ukraine. It's a pretty far cry from where I thought it would be used, and I'm so proud to be part of a movement to do that. We have a minute left, so really quickly, rapid fire. I'm going to go down the line and just give everyone one sentence for a call to action of anything that you want to leave the audience with. So let's start with Sebastian.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation again, and thank you all for being here. If you want to receive a grant from Arweave, specifically in this area, please check out arweave.org. It's a super simple form, and we'll be going back to you very, very soon. We're super happy to have and to support more great projects like the one that Philip is also working on. Thank you.
Philip?
Sure. Thanks a lot for being here. I think the message I want to give out, create content around the importance of Web3, the values, and share it with the world to make more people aware of, how important it is to spread the words of privacy, human rights, decentralizations. I think it's an important mission.
And Jonathan?
Patience. I like to think about patient technology a lot. The rush to create things that are unstoppable and going to solve everything, that's exactly the mindset that got us to the problems of Web 2. Let's think this through. Let's get this chapter of the web right. And with great projects like Philippe and others and Arweave, et cetera, I think there's a way forward.
Well, I feel really honored to join the stage with each of you. Thank you all so much for taking the time to be here today, and excited for what's next. Thanks again, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.